Hello and welcome to Between the Headlines, broadcasting from London. Tonight, as the Met Police Service here in London is convicted under health and safety laws over the shooting dead of Jean-Charles de Menezes, the press demands the head of Britain's top cop, Sir Ian Blair. Will he stay or will he go? We'll also be discussing how the police came to smear the man who was killed after being mistaken for a suicide bomber. Meanwhile, in America, one British columnist suggests that Hillary Clinton's rivals for the Democrat nomination for the US presidency simply don't know how to fight a woman. Helping me to go between the headlines tonight are two journalists and a civil rights campaigner. On my right is Sarah Sands, consultant editor on the Daily Mail. She writes a column for the paper and is a former editor of the Sunday Telegraph and was deputy editor of the Daily Telegraph. Next to her is Asad Rehman, spokesman for the Jean-Charles de Menezes family campaign. And we hope to be joined by Andrea Perry, who's a freelance crime reporter and former crime editor on the Sunday Express, but unfortunately she's been held up by a roadblock put in place by the Metropolitan Police, so we're not quite sure when she can join us, but hopefully we'll hear from her a little later in the programme. But welcome to you both. So what has been making the newspaper headlines today? Well, it is, of course, this guy, Sir Ian Blair, and The Guardian says guilty, but Blair refuses to go. Don't confuse him for the former British Prime Minister. This is Sir Ian. And The Guardian says Sir Ian Blair vowed yesterday to stay on as Britain's top police officer, despite sustained calls for his resignation, after his force was found guilty of catastrophic failings that led to the shooting dead of Jean-Charles de Menezes. An Old Bailey jury found the Metropolitan Police guilty of breaking health and safety laws in July 2005 when de Menezes was killed after being mistaken for a suicide bomber. Fining the force £175,000 and ordering it to pay another £385,000 in costs, the judge called on the force to learn lessons. And it's on a lot of the front pages. We see here in the Times, Met chief urged to quit over shooting. Britain's most senior policeman was fighting to keep his job last night after his force was found guilty of catastrophic failures that led to the shooting dead of an innocent man. And the Times tells us in the body of the piece that the Brazilian electrician was shot 7 times in the head by 2 officers who believed, because of a series of communications failures and inaccurate briefings, that he was one of 4 terrorists on the run after the failed suicide attacks of the previous day. But the Daily Telegraph says in its front page headline, "I won't resign over Menezes, says Met Chief." Sir Ian Blair, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, faced intense pressure to resign last night after his force was found guilty of catastrophic failings in the shooting of Jean-Charles de Menezes, but he says he's not going. And then the Daily Mail perhaps has the punchiest front page of the lot today. I should think Sir Ian Blair didn't like the look of this one. "A man without honour." And they found a library picture, I think it is, of a rather forlorn-looking Sir Ian Blair looking into that headline. His force was yesterday downed for shooting dead an innocent Brazilian. He's lost the trust of his men and brought shame on the Met. But still, Sir Ian Blair won't do the decent thing. And inside, the Mail has a detailed piece, blunders from start to finish, taking apart the chaos, I suppose one might say, of what happened on that day. And Sarah, you are, of course, a consultant editor on the Daily Mail. It is noteworthy that that's a particularly striking front page. It's not very often that the Mail lays into a senior police officer. Why did the Mail do this?
Well, I think that headline is the correct one. I think that on the whole, one wants to back the police. It was a hellish situation. Everyone was very, very jumpy. We just had 52 people killed on the tube. So you can see the context. And in a way, you know, one's slightly more sympathetic towards those men on the ground, you know, who, if they actually believed at the end that that's who they had, the suicide bomber. However, I think David Davis, the Conservative opposition Home Secretary, did say that the mistakes were systemic, and I think that is true. And I think, you know, what's really shocking about Ian Blair's performance is the fact he says he didn't even know about all this till the next day. So you couldn't have a more important operation, and the person in charge doesn't even know what's going on. And I think that has been the criticism of Blair. Even before this, was that he was personally very ambitious, he was a bit of a Labour apparatchik, and that the force didn't actually particularly trust him. Okay. And I think all that, therefore, means that when things go wrong, you just don't have that sort of popular backing.
Well, Asad, the press today does lay into Sir Ian Blair. Pretty much all of them that express a view say he should go. A couple of them, I think The Guardian and The Sun, are a bit more ambivalent, but even they don't come out in support. You must be pretty pleased with the press coverage today.
Well, I think we're obviously pleased with the verdict, and whilst we do believe that Sir Ian Blair must take responsibility and is the person to be held accountable, we don't necessarily want all of the attention to become purely that Sir Ian Blair, and then if he goes, the line will be drawn underneath this issue, and that will be it. We still believe that there's many questions still to be answered about the actual shooting, because the prosecution yesterday was very limited in its scope. It was not actually about the shooting itself. It was about the policies and procedures of the Metropolitan Police on that day, and whether they led not to the death of Jean-Charles, but also whether they put the people of London, they failed to protect the people of London.
So bizarrely, it was health and safety, wasn't it? The charges that they were answering rather than...
Yeah, I mean, it was a prosecution we never really wanted to see in the first place, in the sense that we always believed that there either should be individual charges brought against officers, maybe under manslaughter charges, or that the inquest should take precedent, so that the family have their own legal representatives there. We can interrogate the evidence, we can call a number of witnesses. The witnesses, for example, in this case, were all police officers. There's no witnesses, for example, of the passengers who were in the tube or on the bus or any of those.
But nonetheless, did we really learn anything new as a result of this trial?
Well, we learnt a lot more about actually the police procedures on that day. I mean, we learnt very much about what was taking place in the armed police officers' briefing early in the morning at 4 o'clock. I mean, it was quite shocking in terms of the inaccurate information that was being given, the tempo and of how the briefing's taking place. We're up for it. It was very much gung-ho. You're going to be asked to do things today that you've never done before. So it set the sort of ball rolling that, there was an inevitability that at some point or another, shots would be fired.
Okay.